The Red Army drove the enemy away through the River Don, through the Desna. The Red Army drove them across the Dnieper, pushed them to the Bug. They crossed the Dvina. They drove them away across the Neman. Before them lay Europe and its conquered nations. This is the Vistula. The Red Army reached the Oder, the final zone of advancement before Berlin. This is the Oder. The soldiers crossed the sands flooded with water. 4 years had passed since the beginning of the war. The Red Army had arrived, more experienced in war, better trained, stronger, and more ready to deliver a fatal blow to the enemies than ever before. The Germans call the Oder their river of fate. Now the fate of this German river is in the hands of Russian soldiers.
자기들이 운명의 강이라고 칭하였습니다. 이 독일 강의 운명은 지금 노사와 병사의 수중에 있습니다.
Only a few days remain before the operation starts.
많이 남아 있었습니다.
The last trains are arriving. Many of these trains have already gone into the forest. Tens of thousands of tons of liquid fuel are brought to the front. The army is gathering on the west bank of the Oder until daybreak. On this small piece of ground snatched from the enemy, the military equipment will be gathered to deal the enemy a massive blow. The attack on Berlin will start from this battlefield. Marshal Zhukov of the Soviet Union returns to the front line from the Commander-in-Chief's headquarters. Immediately on this day, meetings are held between the commanders of the troops in the front line and the Armed Service Committee. The generals and others who take part in the war to defend their country get together for this meeting. Today they are having very important discussions. Stalin, the highest commander and head of the Soviet Union, has named the man who will take over the fascist capital of Germany and fly the flag of victory in Berlin.
소비에트 동맹 원수 스탈린은 파시스트 독일의 수부를 점령하여 berlin에서 승전기를 휘날릴 임무를 그들의 앞에 세웠습니다. 작전 계획은
The plan of operation is for the troops led by Marshal Zhukov to besiege Berlin. The troops headed by Marshal Konev would support the operation from the south.
작전을 보장할 것.
The troops led by Marshal Rokossovsky would attack from the north.
북부로부터의 습격을 보장할 것이었습니다.
These commanders make the plans that would lead to the occupation of Berlin.
위하여 전투할 것을 지도에서 연습합니다.
As commanded by Comrade Stalin, everyone from the generals to the soldiers is ready to carry out his historical task.
스탈린 동무의 임무의 실행에 준비하고 있었습니다.
Everyone is ready for the impending attack.
모두 다
Silence falls on the battlefield.
전투장에서는 조용하였습니다.
At 4 o'clock in the morning, 2,000 guns open fire on the enemy's defenses.
적이 방어를 포격하였습니다.
This is an attack on the Oder as has never been seen before.
습격이었습니다.
The Germans built 4 very strong lines of defense between the Oder and Berlin.
강력한 방어선은 사연로 건설하였습니다.
They moved their troops from the front line in the west and concentrated 500,000 troops here.
이곳에 50만 명의 군대를 집중하였습니다.
The Soviet army planned a surprise attack. This was the plan implemented on the battlefield.
이 계획은 전투장에서 실시되게 되었습니다.
This is the field command post of Marshal Zhukov.
여기에서는
All the battle commanders have gathered here.
선이 도착되었습니다.
The Soviet fighter planes attack and crush the enemy's forces all the way to Berlin.
berlin까지의 모든 길에 있는 적군의 예비군을 박멸합니다.
The tanks break through.
전파합니다.
The outcome of the raid is clear. New troops are being dispatched to the battlefield.
전투장으로 파송합니다.
The first frontline troops of the Ukraine march on. Marshal Konev attacks with his army.
원수는 자기의 군대를 가지고 습격하였습니다.
The power of the first sudden blow settles the outcome of this operation. In a short time, all resistance is crushed.
단기간에 저항의 지주전과 중심 전투를 격파하였습니다.
The Soviet army has already driven the enemy back and arrives near Berlin on the 21st of April.
후부에까지 구축하고 4월 21일에 berlin 근동에 방도하였습니다.
Here in this street, groups of soldiers suppress shooting points, charge into the gates, move on to the next targets.
사격점을 진압할 것, 문안으로 돌립할 것, 직사조준을 정할 것이었습니다.
On the first day, the Soviet High Command orders the Germans to pull down the barricades which they had built with their own hands.
건축한 바리카다와 표적을 헐어버리라고 명령하였습니다.
Now they are humbly clearing the roads for the Soviet tanks to enter the center of Berlin.
berlin 중앙으로 들어갈 길을 청결합니다.
Not so long ago, they threw flowers as their own tanks made their way to the battlefield.
바퀴 밑에 꽃을 던진 지가 그리 오래지 아니하였습니다.
From generation to generation, this nation worshipped military power. Look at these hands foolishly lifted up as they shout Heil Hitler.
제대로 교양받았습니다. 하일 히틀러라고 소리를 치면서 우중하게 들던 이 손들을 보십시오.
Now these hands are stretched out contemptibly begging for bread.
지루하게 내드립니다.
The Red Army gives them bread.
에게 떡을 줍니다.
This wounded female fighter should receive compensation from the Germans,
그래서 큰 배상을 받아야 할 것입니다.
but the Red Army does not revenge itself on the ordinary people. The Red Army feeds them.
군대는 그들을 먹여 살립니다.
These people do not resist, but surrender courteously.
항복합니다.
These people had no choice but to surrender.
항복하게 되었습니다.
For those who continue to resist, there is no forgiveness. They cannot be forgiven.
할 수 없는 것입니다.
If they hadn't realized it on these streets of Berlin already, they would certainly realize it now. The fighting gets fiercer.
더 절실히 느낄 것입니다. 전투는 막 심하여지기 시작합니다.
This is Tempelhof, Berlin's main airport.
호프입니다.
When Soviet pilots landed at the airport, the German airplanes were on fire and the infantry was still shooting.
타고 보병 사격이 진행되고 있었습니다.
This prisoner is a second lieutenant and commanding officer of the airport.
우르트 브레스트 육군 소자입니다.
He looks back on those happiest moments of his life.
즐겁던 그때를 지금 회고합니다.
One day, in this very place, Goering had a parade and rewarded his top pilots.
1등 비행사들을 보상하였습니다.
Now he remembers a very sad occasion,
아주 슬픈 것을 회고합니다.
the day Benito Mussolini was brought here.
무솔리니를 실어왔습니다.
Hitler's men had snatched him out of captivity.
도적하여 내왔습니다.
Hitler welcomed his friend, who was a failure.
상한 자기의 친구를 영접하였습니다.
This is a sad recollection for the second lieutenant.
세상입니다.
Tempelhof Airport is located far from the front.
먼 후방에 있습니다.
Soviet artillery bombards the center of Berlin.
을 포격합니다.
Our soldiers advance.
승격을 내면서 전진합니다.
Even in the dead of night, the fighting continues fiercely.
격렬하게 계속되어 갑니다.
Berlin is in flames. But the Berlin residents have long been familiar with the strong smoke of fires.
연기를 압니다.
Here, Hitler set fire to the Reichstag and started the fire that swept the world.
그것은 전 세계를 휩쓴 불이 시초이었습니다.
Here, the fascists burnt down the great masterpieces.
이 위대한 노작을 불에 태워버렸습니다.
Here, Hitler's men marched holding torches and set the whole world ablaze.
하였고 중세기를 회복시켰습니다.
Here, the murderers trained the troops.
군대를 양성하였습니다.
Those who set fire to the cities and farming villages marched on through the whole of Europe from this place.
통하여 행진하였습니다.
The fire of war, which had started from Berlin, now returns to Berlin.
이곳으로 돌아왔습니다.
The fighters are already in the center of the city.
중앙에서 싸웁니다.
In the center of Berlin, the German bourgeois are destroying the shops of their own people and looting the goods.
파괴하며 양탈하여 가지어 갑니다.
Fighting such as has never been seen or heard before continues until the 8th day.
계속되어 갑니다.
The fighters already sense that victory is in their hands. The soldiers with automatic guns rush on.
합니다. 자동총 병사들은 돌진합니다.
When victory is so near, it is very painful to lose any comrade of war.
이들을 잃어버리는 것은 매우 고통스러운 일입니다.
The troops led by Churkov broke through to the town center from the east.
동남으로부터 시내 중앙으로 돌파하였습니다.
More troops advanced to the Reichstag from the north.
부터 제국의회관으로 진행합니다.
In the east, Berzarin's troops are fighting.
싸웁니다.
The net encircling the town center is tightening.
점점 줄어집니다.
It is gradually advancing to the Reichstag.
당도합니다.
The fierceness of the battle reaches its height.
고도에 달하였습니다.
Even at the moment of fierce battle, sympathy and generosity were maintained in the hearts of the Russian soldiers.
관대성이 보존되어 있었습니다.
What did Hitler give to this woman in his criminal plan to rule the whole world?
계획으로서 무엇을 이 여자에게 주었는가?
The soldiers are approaching the Reichstag.
전사들이 보였습니다.
The Reichstag is very near.
가까이 있습니다.
Next to it is the Brandenburg Gate.
대문이 있습니다.
This is the Brandenburg Gate.
대문입니다.
This is where Frederick, Wilhelm, Prussian kings and German emperors had triumphal celebrations.
독일 황제들이 개선식을 하던 곳입니다.
It was not so long ago that the fascists' notorious voice shouted to the whole world from here.
크게 떠들고 있은지 그리 오라지 아니하였습니다.
This place is now taken over. Now only 200 meters to the Reichstag.
200m가 남았습니다.
Now all the people had only one thought, only one hope. This was the thought of flying the flag of victory from the Reichstag.
제국 이사관의 승전기를 휘날릴 그 생각.
This is their one aim, to fly the flag of victory from the Reichstag. The flag of victory is flying on the Reichstag.
휘날리고 있습니다.
Comrade Stalin's order has been carried out.
하였습니다.
The 2nd of May 1945 is a day to be remembered forever in history.
역사에 기록될 날입니다.
Berlin surrendered. The Germans always boasted that Russian troops would never enter Berlin, but they surrendered their capital in just 10 days.
그러나 자기들이 수구를 열흘 만에 내주었습니다.
Compared to the heroic defense of Leningrad, Sevastopol and Stalingrad, this was a very short time indeed.
그가 한다면 그것은 매우 짧은 시일입니다.
On that day, 130,000 German soldiers and officers were captured. On the walls of the houses, graffiti still remains. We will never surrender.
그 글이 아직까지 남아 있습니다.
It is not a coincidence that every window in this place hung a white flag, in the very place where every window had pledged allegiance to Hitler.
그래서 매 유리창마다 히틀러에게 맹세를 하였습니다.
This man is Weidling, the artillery commander who led the defense of Berlin.
그린 그 육군 호령대대입니다.
On the 2nd of May, he gave an order to surrender and was captured along with his staff officers.
참모부와 함께 포로되었습니다.
Berlin was shamed. During the interrogations, General Weidling stated that he saw Hitler on the 29th of April, and Hitler demanded that he should continue to fight.
대항하라고 그대로 강박하였다고 진술하였습니다.
Hitler believed that the Ninth Army in the southeast of Berlin and the tank troops fighting against the Western Allies in the southwest could surround and crush the Soviet troops.
반대하는 출정군이 탱크군이 조력하여서 소비에트 군대를 포위하여 격파할 것을 타산하였습니다.
Die deutsche Armee entweder östwärts oder westlich Berlin herumziehen, um dann die Besatzung zu
General Weidling says he saw Hitler on the 29th of April. He describes what he was like.
봤더니 그의 모양이 어떠하던가 물어보십시오.
I had seen the Führer 1 year before this incident.
1년 전에 퓨레르를 보았습니다.
Now I was surprised to see him.
놀랐습니다.
There was no resemblance to the man of the past.
길이 없었습니다.
He sat sunken deeply in his chair, his hands shaking meaninglessly over a map.
의자에 앉았는데
From time to time, he stopped talking and spoke in a very low, barely audible voice. He was a man without hope.
겨우 들릴만한 낮은 목소리로 말하였습니다. 그는 회복의 희망이 없는 사람이었습니다.
On this day, Lieutenant General Fuchs had identified the body of Goebbels from the heap of corpses found.
게델스의 시체를 알아내었습니다.
Goebbels is silent.
묵묵합니다.
His war minister had been exterminated.
강력되었습니다.
The radio broadcasting station through which he poisoned the whole world with his speeches filled with violence and hatred for mankind for such a long time is also silent.
그 아라지오 방송국도 묵묵합니다.
On this day, Marshal Zhukov visited Berlin.
국을 방문하였습니다.
Marshal Zhukov inspected the areas where the fighting had been going on, accompanied by Lieutenant General Berzarin, the commander of Berlin, and Lieutenant General Weidling.
중장, 모코브 육군 중장들과 동행하여 얼마 전에 싸우던 지대를 시찰하였습니다.
This is the monument to Wilhelm I. This is the General Staff Office, from where many plans were prepared for decades.
많은 전쟁의 계획이 작성되어 있었습니다.
This is Hitler's Staff Office. This is the Victory Monument. The soldiers of the tank troops led by Lieutenant General Goldanov found these flags.
이 기들을 발견하였습니다.
Under these flags, the German troops fought twice to rule the world and were defeated both times, under the command of the Eagle flag of Prussia and then under the command of these fascist flags.
독수리 기호 밑에서 그리고 파시스트적 기호의 깃발 밑에서
On this day, in the streets of Berlin, the victors met the freed French, Belgians, Americans, Dutch, Norwegians, and British.
미국 사람, 다른 사람, 노르웨기아 사람, 영국 사람들을 만났습니다.
On the street, the American soldiers meet the hero Chuikov, who became famous in the battle for Leningrad.
주이코브 영웅을 만났습니다.
The soldiers and officers have their pictures taken by the Reichstag.
대표서 사진을 밝힙니다.
On the wall of this house is graffiti. Berlin will remain the city of German people.
있습니다.
Yes, it is true. Berlin has remained the city of German people. Nevertheless, the writings of Russian soldiers will never be forgotten.
잊을 수가 없을 것입니다. 승리의 가장 좋은 길은 백림을 통하여서 오데스, 스탈린그라드를 지나서 백림으로 우리는 웨네츠에서 왔다. 나의 포탄은 여기에 맞았다. 스탈린이 계신 곳에는 승리가 있다라고 지어 있습니다.